Resident Evil has spent nearly 3 decades perfecting a very specific type of horror. Not zombies jumping out of shadows, but the slow documented destruction of people turned into experiments against their will. From children used as test subjects, to families imprisoned inside their own bodies, to decades of torture that nobody outside a corporate lab even knew was happening. Today, I'm breaking down the 8 most disturbing character backstories in the Resident Evil franchise, ranked from deeply unsettling to absolutely unbearable, starting with a teenager who never got to finish growing up, Steve Burnside. Steve Burnside is the youngest person on this list, and that's exactly what makes his story hit different. He died at 17 years old, and everything terrible that could happen to a teenager happened within a single week. Born on May 14, 1981, Steve grew up as the son of an Umbrella Corporation employee. When his father got caught selling company secrets, Umbrella's response was total. They executed Steve's mother and threw both Steve and his father into the Rockfort Island Penal Facility, a remote prison camp run by the Ashford family. Steve was approximately 17 when the place went to hell. In December 1998, the HCF attacked Rockfort Island, triggering a T-virus outbreak that turned the entire prison population into zombies. Steve escaped during the chaos and met Claire Redfield, the first person to show him actual kindness in years. But the virus forced a confrontation Steve couldn't avoid. Deep in the facility, he found his father shambling toward him as a zombie. Steve shot his own reanimated father to survive, then collapsed crying. A kid who'd already lost his mother now had to destroy what was left of his dad with his own hands. Here's where it gets worse. After escaping to Antarctica, Steve was captured by Alexia Ashford, who chained him down and injected him with the T. Veronica virus while Claire watched. The transformation was immediate and brutal. Reptilian scales erupted across his skin, bone spurs tore through his shoulders, his body swelled into something monstrous, and he vomited blood as the virus rewrote his biology. Alexia handed him a massive axe and sent him to kill Claire, but something unprecedented happened. As Steve raised the axe over Claire, his feelings for her broke through the virus's control. He saved her instead, got impaled by Alexia in retaliation, and reverted to human form just long enough to die in Claire's arms. His last words were a confession, "I'm glad I met you. I loved you." He was 17, admitting his first love with his last breath. Even death wasn't the end. Albert Wesker stole Steve's corpse to extract the virus, and the body eventually got sold to a drug lord. Steve Burnside's final violation was becoming a commodity in someone else's deal. His story complete before he ever turned 18. But if you think a week of concentrated horror is bad, the next person spent their entire childhood watching their family fall apart. Donna Beneviento. Among the 4 lords in Resident Evil Village, Donna Beneviento is the quietest and easily the most tragic. This is a woman whose backstory reads less like survival horror and more like a case study in what happens when childhood trauma just keeps compounding with zero intervention. Born into the noble Beneviento family in an isolated Eastern European village, Donna suffered from severe social anxiety made worse by a disfiguring facial scar. Her father was a doll maker, and he crafted a porcelain doll named Angie that became Donna's only method of communication. She literally could not speak to other people directly, only through the doll, a coping mechanism born from psychological damage that would never be treated. Then the damage got worse. Mother Miranda, the century-old cult leader running the village, had been conducting Kadu parasite experiments on villagers for decades, searching for a vessel to resurrect her dead daughter Ava. Members of the Beneviento family were among her test subjects. Donna's relative Bernadette was killed during experiments in the 1950s. Another relative, Claudia, died the same way. The grief from watching their family members die in Miranda's experiments drove Donna's parents to kill themselves, leaving their already fragile daughter completely alone in the Beneviento estate. Miranda then turned to Donna herself, implanting the Kadu parasite directly into the orphaned girl. Donna survived, but Miranda's notes are devastating. She dismissed Donna as underdeveloped and too mentally ill to serve as Eva's vessel. Miranda kept Donna as a lord not because she cared, but because she was useful. For Donna, this was yet another parental figure who looked at her and decided she wasn't good enough. The Kadu amplified everything wrong with Donna. She retreated completely into isolation, populating her home with animated dolls. She cultivated hallucinogenic flowers whose pollen could induce terrifying hallucinations in anyone who entered her domain. When Ethan Winters arrived searching for part of his dismembered daughter, Donna stripped him of all weapons through hallucination and unleashed the baby, a grotesque fetal monster that chased him through the basement in what fans consistently call the most psychologically terrifying sequence in the entire franchise. But Donna's death is what cements the tragedy. When Ethan finally cornered her, she didn't fight back. She begged him not to leave. This woman, orphaned by suicide, disfigured, experimented on, dismissed as worthless by her surrogate mother, isolated for years with only dolls for company, wanted one thing: for someone to stay. Ethan stabbed the Angie doll 3 times with scissors, only realizing too late that he'd been stabbing Donna herself. She calcified and crumbled apart. Donna Beneviento never chose to be a villain. She was manufactured into one by a lifetime of abandonment, and she died still reaching for a connection nobody ever offered her. At least Donna's suffering was mostly psychological. The next 2 people discovered their entire existence was a lie built into their DNA. The Ashford twins. Alexia and Alfred Ashford from Resident Evil Code Veronica present a horror that's not about viral mutation, but about the fundamental violation of what it means to be human. They were not born, they were engineered. Their father, Dr. Alexander Ashford, was desperate to restore his declining family's reputation within Umbrella Corporation. His solution was Project Code Veronica, a genetic experiment where he extracted DNA from the embalmed corpse of his ancestor, Veronica Ashford, combined it with a gene-controlling human intellect, and implanted the embryos in an unnamed surrogate mother. The twins were born around 1971 as products of eugenics, designed to be intellectual weapons. Alexia was the intended success, a child prodigy who graduated university at 10 and became Umbrella's youngest chief senior researcher at the Antarctic facility. Alfred was the unintended byproduct, possessing only slightly above average intelligence, forever inadequate beside his sister. Japanese developer guides confirm that Alexander's genetic tampering accidentally warped both twins' psychological architecture, producing extreme narcissism and sociopathy from birth. They were incapable of normal empathy, not because of choice, but because of a design. Their only genuine emotional bond was with each other. Isolated from scholars by age and from children by intellect, they existed in a social vacuum. The breaking point came in February 1983, when 12-year-old Alfred discovered a hidden room containing all of Alexander's research archives. The files revealed everything. They were clones. Alexander viewed them as experiments rather than children. Their entire existence was instrumentalized. Both twins captured their father and injected him with the T. Veronica virus, which Alexia herself had created by combining the progenitor virus with an ancient virus extracted from queen ant DNA. Alexander mutated into a mindless, howling creature called Nosferatu and was locked in a subterranean cell beneath the Antarctic facility, where he remained alive and in agony for 15 years. Alexia, having watched her father's failed transformation, deduced that the T. Veronica virus required 15 years of cryogenic stasis to properly bond with a host. In December 1983, she injected herself and entered cryosleep, entrusting Alfred to guard her. What followed was Alfred's complete psychological disintegration. Left utterly alone, his only human connection frozen in a tube, Alfred developed dissociative identity disorder. He created an alternate personality modeled on Alexia. He dressed in her clothes, spoke in her voice, and held conversations with a sister who existed only in his fracturing mind. He ruled Rockford Island as an unstable dictator for 15 years, unaware his dialogues with Alexia were hallucinations. When Alfred finally activated Alexia's thawing process, he was mortally wounded. She awoke to find her twin brother dying in her arms, cradled him, and sang a lullaby. Her subsequent rampage was driven partly by grief. The Ashford story is Resident Evil's most complete meditation on eugenics. 2 children manufactured without the capacity for normal humanity, who discovered their creator saw them as instruments, and whose response was to become exactly the monsters they were designed to be. But at least the Ashfords were born broken. The next family started out completely normal, and that's what makes their fate so much worse. The Baker family. The Baker family's backstory in Resident Evil 7 inverts the franchise's usual formula. Most characters become monsters through injection or infection, and then cease to be themselves. Jack, Marguerite, and Zoe Baker remained conscious inside their corrupted bodies for nearly 3 years, fully aware of every atrocity they committed while powerless to stop it. Before October 2014, the Bakers were an ordinary Louisiana family on a Dulve Parish plantation. Jack was a military veteran. Marguerite was a devoted homemaker. Their son Lucas showed troubling signs. He'd killed a childhood friend as a boy, but Jack and Marguerite were fundamentally caring people. When Hurricane Greta washed the tanker carrying the bioweapon, Eveline and her handler Mia Winters ashore, Jack rescued both from the wreckage and brought them into his home. His compassion was the vector of his family's destruction. The Daughter's DLC depicts the night everything changed with devastating clarity. Eveline, a child-shaped weapon that spreads psychotropic mold through physical contact, began infecting the family one by one. Marguerite turned violent first, then briefly regained control and begged Eveline not to hurt her family, shoving car keys at Zoe and screaming at her to run. Jack tried to drown the infected Marguerite, then stabbed himself, then dragged a screaming Lucas toward Eveline. Lucas's cries echo through the DLC as the last words of the Baker family as they existed before. For nearly 3 years, from October 2014 to July 2017, the Bakers abducted, tortured, butchered, and cannibalized over 100 victims. Marguerite's body mutated to birth and control insects from a hive that replaced her lower torso. Jack became a regenerating horror who could survive having half his face destroyed. They held Mia Winters captive, kidnapped tourists and homeless people, and served human remains at a dinner table that became one of the franchise's most iconic images. The most devastating moment comes midway through RE7, when Ethan encounters Jack in a vision. Jack speaks calmly, lucidly, and politely. The real man, surfacing momentarily from beneath Eveline's control. He explains that he and Marguerite lapse in and out of awareness, helplessly watching themselves commit horrors from behind their own eyes. He asks Ethan to stop Eveline, and in an extraordinary moment of empathy, expresses pity for the bioweapon child, a good man, trapped inside a monster, feeling compassion for the creature that imprisoned him. Zoe Baker's parallel horror is quieter but equally harrowing. She somehow retained her free will despite infection, spending 3 years alone among her insane family, secretly helping victims escape via whispered phone calls. When Eveline discovered Zoe's resistance, she accelerated the mold inside Zoe's body until she calcified, a punishment for loyalty to her own humanity. Zoe was eventually rescued in the end of Zoe DLC by Jack's brother Joe, but the family she knew was gone. The Baker's story endures because it answers a question most zombie fiction avoids. What if the person was still in there, watching, the entire time? Speaking of being trapped in your own body, the next person fought through 2 entire games without realizing he'd already died in the first 10 minutes. Ethan Winters. Ethan Winters occupies a unique space in Resident Evil, an ordinary man subjected to extraordinary mutilation who discovers, in his final moments, that he stopped being a man years ago. Born around 1984, Ethan was a systems engineer in Los Angeles who married Mia Winters in 2011, completely unaware that she was a covert operative for The Connections, a crime syndicate specializing in bioweapons. When Mia vanished during the 2014 tanker incident, Ethan spent 3 years believing she was dead. The physical toll Ethan endures across Alphas RE7 and RE Village is the most extreme sustained bodily destruction any protagonist survives in the franchise. In RE7 alone, Mia chainsawed off his left hand and Zoe Baker stapled it back on. Jack Baker severed his leg. He was beaten, stabbed, and dragged through the Baker estate. He was seated at a table of human remains and force-fed rotting food. In RE Village, the damage escalated beyond reason. A lichen bit off 2 fingers within minutes of arrival. The Dimitrescu daughters impaled both hands on meat hooks. Lady Dimitrescu sliced off his left hand entirely. She tasted his blood and called it stale, a clue players wouldn't understand until the finale. His right hand was also severed. He was fed through industrial rotating blades. He was stabbed repeatedly throughout the village. The revelation that recontextualizes everything arrives near Village's climax. Ethan was killed by Jack Baker during their very first encounter in RE7, the moment Jack stomped on his head in the guest house. The mold reanimated Ethan's body, turning him into a sentient molded construct. He had been technically dead for 3.5 years without knowing it. Every reattached limb, every survived impalement, every impossible recovery, all of it was the mold, holding together a corpse animated by sheer paternal determination. Capcom's Collector's Edition art book is literally titled The Tragedy of Ethan Winters. The final act strips away even this borrowed existence. Mother Miranda ripped Ethan's heart from his chest, and he still fought on, his mold body finally reaching its limit. After Miranda's defeat, Ethan's form began disintegrating. Regeneration exhausted. He handed baby Rose to Chris Redfield, told Chris to teach her strength and detonated an explosive to destroy the Megamycete, sacrificing what remained of his borrowed life. The title card reads, "The father's story is done." In the Shadows of Rose DLC, Ethan exists only as a consciousness preserved within the Megamycete's memory realm. He appears to his 16-year-old daughter Rose as a figure called Michael, guiding her through dangers one last time before a final farewell. The tragedy is layered. Ethan's wife's secret career caused his original death. He fought across 2 games to protect a family built on deceptions, and he discovered the truth about himself only in the moments before he ceased to exist entirely. He was designed as an everyman, no combat training, no special forces background, which makes every wound land harder. Ethan Winters is what happens when an ordinary person's love collides with a world that treats human bodies as disposable material. At least Ethan got to live as a man before becoming something else. The next person never had that chance, because she was grown in a lab and programmed to be a weapon from day one. Eveline. Eveline, designated E001, is Resident Evil 7's central antagonist and its most tragic figure simultaneously. A child engineered for destruction who spent her brief existence desperately seeking the one thing her creators ensured she could never have, she was developed by the Connections using a sample of the mold provided by Mother Miranda, combined with DNA from Miranda's deceased daughter Eva. Eveline was grown in a laboratory, artificially aged to appear as a 10-year-old girl, and programmed for a single purpose: infiltrate civilian populations, schools, refugee camps, government buildings, and use mind control via mold secretion to neutralize targets without combat. Unused game files reveal the human cost of perfecting this weapon. Eveline was preceded by at least 8 failed prototypes, the D-Series, designated D001 through D008, all young girls, most of whom died horrific deaths. The clinical log entries read like an atrocity ledger. Decrepit at 319 days. Infection, suicide, 1 prototype killed another. 1 was disposed of due to poor performance. Eveline was the first E-type specimen stable enough to deploy, built on a foundation of dead children. Her design carried a critical flaw that would define her suffering. Without periodic injections of a control serum, the mold accelerated Eveline's cellular aging, degraded her cognitive function, and destabilized her powers. She was a weapon with an expiration date, requiring constant pharmaceutical maintenance to remain functional. In October 2014, the Connections attempted to transport her aboard the cargo ship LNG Annabelle, with handlers Mia Winters and Alan Droney posing as her parents. During a hurricane, Eveline destabilized. She infected the ship, killed Alan, who had called her a little bitch, and caused the tanker to crash in Dolby, Louisiana. What followed was 3 years of accelerating decay. Jack Baker rescued Eveline from the wreckage and brought her home. Within weeks, she had infected the entire Baker family, bending them into a mind-controlled surrogate family. Eveline forced the Bakers to abduct strangers so she could expand her family, a grotesque parody of the domestic love she was biologically programmed to crave, but genetically incapable of receiving through normal means. Without her medication, observation logs from Lucas Baker document her visible deterioration. By mid-2016, she was coughing constantly, losing hair, and aging at an alarming rate. Her daily routine, per Lucas's notes, she just plays with dolls all day. By early 2017, the 10-year-old had aged into an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her body collapsing around a child's mind. When Ethan Winters injected her with the E-necrotoxin, Eveline's final words were a child's plea: "Why does everyone hate me?" She transformed into a massive molded structure and was destroyed, a weapon that outlived its usefulness, discarded by creators who never saw her as human. Mother Miranda, who had provided the original genetic material, rejected Eveline as an imperfect vessel for Ava, adding yet another layer of parental abandonment to a life defined by it. An in-game scientist's note puts it simply: someone sentimental might interpret her actions as a lonely kid trying to make up for a lifetime spent in an impersonal lab. Eveline is Resident Evil's most complete expression of a theme that runs through the franchise: that the real horror isn't the monsters, but what people do to children in pursuit of power. But if you think being engineered as a weapon is disturbing, the next person was just a normal 12-year-old when her father stopped being human and started hunting her. Sherry Birkin. Sherry Birkin's story across Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 6 is a masterclass in compounding trauma. Each phase of her life worse than the last, each supposed rescue leading to new explorations exploitation. Born around 1986 to doctors, William and Annette Birkin, Sherry's childhood was defined by absence. Both parents were consumed by their work as Umbrella Corporation virologists at the Arklay Laboratory, and later at the underground nest facility beneath Raccoon City. Sherry essentially raised herself, her parents too obsessed with developing the G virus, a progenitor virus strain intended for Umbrella's eugenics program, to provide basic parental care. The night of September 29, 1998, destroyed what little normalcy Sherry had. The USS infiltrated William Birkin's lab to seize the G virus. Birkin was shot multiple times, but in desperation injected himself with a sample. The virus transformed him into a cascading series of increasingly monstrous forms, the creature known simply as G. The botched raid caused T-virus samples to leak into Raccoon City's sewer system and water supply, triggering the citywide zombie outbreak that would end with the government sterilizing the city via thermobaric missile. 12-year-old Sherry fled to the Raccoon City Police Department on her mother's orders, clutching a locket containing a hidden G-virus sample. The station was already overrun. She encountered Claire Redfield, who became her protector, the first adult to prioritize Sherry's safety over viral research. But Sherry's father, mutating beyond recognition, stalked them through the sewers and underground passages. William Birkin, now a grotesque mass of exposed muscle, bone, and eyeball-studded flesh, no longer recognized his daughter as his child. The G-virus's reproductive imperative identified Sherry only as a compatible host. In a scene that remains one of the franchise's most disturbing, the creature that was once her father implanted a G-virus embryo inside Sherry's body, attempting to reproduce through his own 12-year-old daughter. Sherry's condition deteriorated rapidly as the embryo grew. Claire raced her to nest and administered the devil vaccine just before full transformation, halting the mutation but leaving permanent alterations to Sherry's genome. During this nightmare, Sherry watched her mother Annette die from injuries, hearing Annette's final words, an apology for not being a good mother, a deathbed admission that arrived years too late. Rescue brought no relief. The U.S. government took Sherry into custody, and because trace amounts of the G virus remained in her blood, along with antibodies of immense scientific value, she was subjected to years of daily experiments and medical testing. Her legal guardian was assigned as Derek Simmons, a manipulative national security advisor who used Sherry as leverage to force Leon Kennedy's cooperation as a government agent. Claire Redfield visited when she could, providing the only emotional stability in Sherry's adolescence. But Sherry's teenage years were spent as a government laboratory specimen. She was not a ward of the state. She was an asset, her blood more valuable than her well-being. The G-virus remnants gave Sherry regenerative abilities. She could survive impalement and heal rapidly, but this biological gift made her blood a target. It was later used by scientist Carla Radames to engineer the C-virus, deployed in the 2012 to 2013 global bioterrorist attacks that killed tens of thousands. Sherry's body, violated by her father at 12, became the source material for one of the franchise's most devastating weapons. In RE6, now 26, Sherry was captured alongside Jake Muller and subjected to another 6 months of experimentation by Neo Umbrella. The cycle repeated. Survive horror, be rescued, become a test subject again. Sherry eventually became a capable federal agent, but the architecture of her trauma is staggering. Neglected by her parents, parasitized by her own father, orphaned, imprisoned, experimented on through her entire adolescence, used as political leverage, and then having her very blood weaponized into a global catastrophe. Every institution that was supposed to protect her, family, government, science, instead extracted something from her body and called it progress. But as horrific as Sherry's story is, it happened over years with periods of relative safety in between. The final person on this list experienced 28 consecutive years of torture, and the last thing she did before dying was search for a mother who'd been dead the entire time, Lisa Trevor. Lisa Trevor's backstory, revealed through scattered documents and encounters in the 2002 Resident Evil remake, is the franchise's definitive tragedy, a horror so complete in its destruction of a human being that series creator Shinji Mikami specifically designed her so players would feel sympathetic and guilty for fighting her. Community consensus across Reddit threads, fan analyses, and gaming publications is nearly unanimous. Lisa Trevor is the most disturbing character backstory in Resident Evil history, and one of the most harrowing in all of video games. Lisa was born around 1953, the daughter of architect George Trevor and his wife Jessica. George's firm was commissioned by Oswell E. Spencer to design the Spencer Mansion in the Arklay Mountains, an elaborate estate concealing underground laboratories. When the mansion was completed in 1967, Spencer invited the Trevor family to stay as guests. It was a trap. On approximately November 10th, 1967, 14-year-old Lisa and her mother Jessica were seized by Spencer's guards and taken to the underground cavern laboratory. George was separately imprisoned in the mansion's labyrinthine corridors. Jessica and Lisa were injected with type A and type B strains of the progenitor virus, a retrovirus Spencer believed could drive human evolution. Jessica reacted poorly and was executed within 3 days, discarded as a failed experiment while her daughter lay in the next room. George Trevor wandered his own architectural creation until he starved to death, his final diary entry recording the discovery of his own tombstone, placed there by Spencer before the family even arrived. The trap had been planned from the beginning. Lisa, at 14, was now an orphan in a basement laboratory, and no one outside those walls knew she existed. Lisa reacted positively to the progenitor infection, developing superhuman strength and regenerative abilities that made her medically unprecedented and therefore invaluable. For the next 28 years, from 1967 to 1995, Lisa Trevor was kept underground as a perpetual test subject, a living canvas for every experimental pathogen Umbrella's researchers could devise. She was chained to her bed, fed intravenously, and moved by wheelchair between testing stations. In 1978, Dr. William Birkin injected her with an Ne alpha-type parasite. Her body absorbed it entirely, an unprecedented reaction that inadvertently produced the biological precursor to the G virus, one of the most devastating bioweapons in the franchise. In 1988, further extraction from her blood yielded insights contributing to what would become the Golgotha virus. Lisa Trevor's unwilling body was the wellspring from which Umbrella's worst creations flowed. The psychological deterioration documented across her in-game diary entries is among the most disturbing pieces of writing in the franchise. Early entries are coherent. A confused teenager asking where her mother went, why she can't leave, when she'll go home. The handwriting progressively degrades across years of entries, sentences fragmenting, words becoming illegible, the cognitive architecture of a human mind collapsing under decades of viral experimentation. The final entries are nearly unreadable scrawl. The last comprehensible phrase, repeated across multiple entries, "Where is Mom?" This question drove Lisa's most horrific behavior. Desperate to control their volatile subject, Umbrella periodically sent female researchers, disguised as Jessica, to pacify Lisa, but some fragment of Lisa's damaged mind recognized the deception every time. She became convinced these women had stolen her mother's face. Her response was to tear it off. Lisa killed multiple researchers across the years, ripping their faces from their skulls and stitching them together into a grotesque mask she wore over her own mutilated features. Layered faces of dead women, worn by a girl searching for her mother underneath them. At least 3 researchers were killed this way by 1995. Her living quarters contained mutilated dolls, artifacts of both rage and a yearning for the childhood stolen from her at 14. After the G-virus was successfully extracted, Umbrella lost interest. In 1995, the USS was ordered to execute Lisa Trevor. They shot her, waited 3 days, and declared her dead. Her regenerative abilities brought her back. Her body was dumped in the Arklay Mountains, where she survived as a feral figure for 3 years, a woman in her 40s with the broken mind of a teenager, wandering the woods above the laboratory where she'd spent most of her life. During the 1998 mansion incident, STARS members encountered Lisa as a shambling, moaning figure draped in her mask of faces, virtually indestructible and emitting sounds that were equal parts rage and grief. Mikami designed the encounters so that players could choose not to fight her, a deliberate choice to emphasize that she was a victim, not a villain. In the final encounter, when Jessica's coffin is opened, Lisa approaches, sees her mother's remains, and utters a single word, "Mother." She takes the skull, cradles it, and throws herself into the chasm. After 28 years of searching, she found what was left of Jessica and chose to follow her. The community finds Lisa Trevor most disturbing, not because of any single element, but because of the totality. A child victim, body horror, psychological decay, face collecting, 28 years of unbroken suffering, loss of identity, loss of humanity, and a finale that offers recognition without redemption. She found her mother. Her mother was Bones. She jumped. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.